when it switched for you from I deserve all this to when you realize I need to be more authentic to myself?
That moment happened in prison, blaming everybody else. They did this, they did that. I was reading a book called Outwitting the Devil at the time by Napoleon Hill, and it had a quote in there that said, every tragedy carries with it the seed of an equivalent benefit. So wow. I go, all right, I lost everything. I was engaged to my daughter's mom. That got called off. Family impacts, financial impacts, going through a dehumanizing process, turning yourself from a name into a number. But I wasn't convinced that that quote was actually true at the time, but that was the turning point to go, well, if it's true, what could be potential benefits from this? And when I started reframing the way I was looking at things, that was the beginning of there's actually some good stuff here. I've been able to read, study, know who I am, understand more about myself. That led to, oh shit, this is all my fault. If you're a Matrix fan, when Neo walks in to see the Oracle, she's baking cookies. Interesting things is if you look at the sign that's above her doorway, it says Temet Nosce. It's Latin and it means know thyself. That's one of the most important things I think in this human experience that we go through is to really understand not what the world tells you you are, not what your family tells you are, your friends or whatever. Like, who are you? What do you care about at your core?
Hey y'all, Josh Tomioni with the Derelict Podcast. Welcome back. We're so glad you're here. Would you do me a favor? It will only take you a couple seconds. Whether you're listening or watching right now, will you head on over to YouTube and hit that subscribe button? It really helps us get this message to more and more people that we can help. Greatly appreciate all of you. Thank you so much for being here and enjoy the episode.
Welcome to the Derelict Podcast. For the disparaged, depleted, and delinquent souls trying to find our way, we're talking about the scary part of the journey, where we don't know how it'll end. Let's be free to face our fucking failures in real time as the most unadulterated, truest version of who we are. No sugarcoating. Welcome to the shit show, you derelict.
Hey, you derelicts. Welcome to another episode of the Derelict Podcast. I am your host, Josh Tomioni, and we have another special guest here today. Somebody who, if we were in the same room, I would be under his shadow. Not actually under his shadow, not metaphorically. Maybe metaphorically too, once we get to know Seth a little bit. But Seth, man, so glad you're here.
Thanks, Josh. Happy to be here, man, for sure.
Yeah. So I will introduce Seth a little bit, and then I want Seth to introduce himself. But here's how I want to introduce him, y'all, is that I want to introduce him by what we're going to be talking about today. So Seth has had a very interesting life, to say the least. Everything from real estate, mortgages, the financial crisis, which ended up in prison. Before that, basketball. The dude's 7 feet tall. I mean, look at that guy, right? Like you can tell, maybe, I don't know, maybe you can't tell, but he's a big dude. He's made a lot of mistakes, just like all of us have. He's failed just like all of us have. And honestly, we had a conversation a little while ago, and I was thinking, man, I would love to have you on and talk about what you went through and the different, even more importantly, like the victimhood that you had while you were making the mistakes that ended up in prison. So let's just pause on that, audience. That's one of the big things we're gonna hit. And that is so important because we make these mistakes, we go through these failures, we do these things, and then it's all about how we decide to interact with those. Are we going to just be a victim and say, oh my God, it was everybody else's fault? Or are we going to be a victor? We've talked about that on the podcast before. And again, if you're new here, subscribe, like, all the things that I'm supposed to say. But if you have not heard that one, go back and listen. We did 2 episodes on victimhood versus victor that I think you'll find interesting, especially after listening to the conversation that Seth and I are about to have. So with that, Seth, what else would you like to say to introduce yourself? Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Appreciate it. Now, excited about having this conversation with you for sure. Super important, and I think critical in life trajectory pieces too. So, you did a great job with the intro. So started my career, played basketball, played for the Lakers for a while, played in Europe for 7 years. Had a great time doing that. That was kind of all I really knew was basketball for a long time. I knew I had some injuries playing ball, so I knew that my career was coming to an end, and wasn't sure when that was going to be. Knew I didn't want to stay in Europe forever, so started kind of looking at what that next step was going to be, and I wasn't sure what it was, but I was smart enough to know that I had made some money playing basketball, and I spent a lot of money playing basketball too. So I needed to kind of figure out a way to protect the money that I had made from myself, basically, knowing that if the income dries up, I'm on the streets pretty quick. So, and I keep my spending habits up the way they did. So I ended up buying a couple properties in 2003 early on, and had no idea what I was doing. But I was like, my mentality was, let's just keep this away from myself. At least I got to, if I put it in a property, I got to refinance or sell it, or, whatever the case may be. Learned a ton in that process, really kind of fell in love with real estate, at that point, and transitioned, my career into real estate. Ended up running a branch of a national mortgage company for 6 years. We did over $1 billion of loans, every year. And was really good. It made a lot of money, doing that. It was a great time in the marketplace. Had an investment firm, that was doing kind of fix and flips, long-term hold stuff on the residential side, et cetera. And really got kind of more arrogant than I already was, to be, truth be told. And kind of more, it just boosted my entitlement, mentality, which I think is a good thing to understand as far as a baseline, for the conversation that we're going to have today. In that space of arrogance, it was the beginning of the kind of financial crisis, and so I saw some of the cracks in the system and things like that. Some of the deceit that was going on in the financial system, and the way that we're taught one thing, and it's really run in a different way. Kind of, it made me upset, right? And again, that entitlement and kind of victim mentality kind of goes, hey, this shouldn't be this way. Like, fight the thing. And so I did, and I fought in my own way, which I'm sure we'll get into in a bit. But I lost, and I spent 5 years in federal prison from 2009 to 2014. Lost everything I had built, during that process. There's family impacts, friends impacts, financial impact, all that. And it ended up being one of the best things that ever could have happened to me, in the long run. Hardest thing I've ever gone through in my entire life, most difficult. And like I said, tons of impacts to other people too. But it was a necessary part of my life to really kind of get the transition, to understand, who I am, what I care about, what I don't. When I got released in 2014, started building up from zero. Have, multiple multifamily assets, at this point. And I also work with the criminal justice system, and do some consulting with a large tech company. Worked with Y Combinator companies in the space of criminal justice. And that brings us to here.
Wow. That's quite a story.
It's been a ride for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Man, that is quite a story. So let's back up for a second. You're growing up. So first of all, when you're growing up, you're playing basketball when you're growing up.
Yeah.
Did you get tall pretty quickly? I mean, did you already know that you're going to be tall, or was it?
I'd always been taller than everybody else, but in high school I started at 6'3", and I ended up 7'1", and I grew basically like 3 inches every year. So it was pretty consistent.
Well, so even starting high school, you're still tall compared to most people, right?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. So basically, your whole path was I want to play for the NBA one day?
Yeah.
Was that the goal? Okay, got it. So you do that. You get into the NBA. You have this career. You wisely, unlike most people that are in sports, as you're well aware, make a bunch of money and then lose it all, right? Especially when you make it when you're young. And that's not just true of sports, obviously. That's true of anything, right? Like any especially with that entitlement, which is what I want to get to here in a second.
Yeah.
But anything where you make a bunch of money really quickly, usually you lose it, right? Like not everybody's Elon Musk, where they make $108 million from selling a company that they made, which could be enough. It was 108, 180. It was one of those numbers, which is enough for most people just to walk away and never work ever again. It was 180. And the reason I remember it was 180 is because he reinvested all 180. So I don't know if you know how much about his story, but it's really interesting. He made $180 million when he sold that. He then reinvested, I think it was $100 million into Tesla. 70 million, and then 10 million was in Solar City, and 70 million I think was in SpaceX, I believe, if I remember the numbers correctly. And he had so little money that he was literally sleeping on a friend's couch because he just reinvested everything. And then all of them, 2008, right at the beginning of the financial crisis we're talking about, we're all on the edge of bankruptcy. So he's a unique story. What most people do is they make all that money and then they go out and they blow it. And then they try to figure out how to get money back the rest of their life. Right.
Yep.
So I guess my first question is, what was it, maybe in the way that you were raised or something else, that actually had you realize like, oh, I need to take this seriously and I need to actually do something with some of this money that I have so that I don't just go broke?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's really like a fear of living on the streets. I grew up in South San Francisco, was close to San Francisco, in and out of San Francisco all the time. I'd seen people that the homeless population, which is a totally different issue that I have zero idea how to solve, but, was always kind of there in my life. And I'm like, oh, how do you, I was always curious about how the stories are of, how people get to this space and, whether it's drugs or decisions or whatever the case may be. And, I didn't realize it until I, kind of grew up later on, but like that, had an impact. And I'm like, I have a fear of living, being on the streets. And part of it is that fear kind of drives a lot of the things I do. And I don't know at what level that threat.
Where do you, but help me understand, like a lot of people see a lot of homeless people and they don't have that fear. But you didn't grow up did you grow up in a household that was homeless? No. Did you know people that were? I mean, what was it that do you think that triggered, like where did the fear come from?
I think the fear of the unknown of just how people got to that space, right? It's like, okay, what decisions got there? And it's, it's like, not having anything is a driver, still to this day, but I'm aware of the driver now, it's in the forefront, not in the background. And I think there's just different people have different stories, right, that play in their head. And I gave some reason, I gave that homelessness or living on the streets kind of meaning, and it just stuck. And it was just like, okay, I can't do that. I can't, I mean? Like I got, I want, I've lived this lifestyle. I want to continue to do that.
You had this fear of just not being able to have anything and ending up homeless, et cetera, and how it's, impacted a lot of different decisions in your life.
Yep. Yeah. And in a good way too. I mean, like it's that kind of fear that drives me. You got people to support, you got family, things that you want to do. So it can be unhealthy for sure. But, like I said, I was not the smartest guy on the planet, but I was smart enough to, look at the income and expenses and go, okay, if you keep this lifestyle up, then, it costs this amount, to do that a year. And if you don't have that income, you're just going to drain your resources, over a certain period of time. So, what else are you going to do? Start planning for that. And, again, I basketball was the only thing that I really, knew and, had my 10,000 hours in, right? Like Malcolm Gladwell talks about, right? So it was something that I just done consistently. That was the plan. That was always a plan. Things went well, things shifted, and you kind of roll with the challenges. And so, I just found that I like the real estate side and saw that it can be a vehicle, to move things forward. And so that's what I ended up throwing myself into from there.
So help me understand. So this is an interesting perspective, I think a lot of men that are listening to this or watching this are going to relate to. And that is, I'm not sure if people picked up on it yet, but I did. And I think it's really fascinating. You had this fear, right, of losing everything, being homeless, being one of those people that, maybe it was a control thing, I'm not sure. But you had this fear of, well, I need to make sure that my life is okay. I can't be out of control like this, which is interesting given what happened in your story. And I want to hear how that relates.
Yep.
So you had this fear of, well, I need to make sure that everything's okay. But then at the same time, you mentioned earlier that you also had this entitlement, which I think is really fascinating because those two seem to go against each other, right? Like a lot of the times I meet people that have this fear of losing everything and they control things and they're like, okay, great. So I'm never going to let that happen. Yeah. And a lot of the times that turns into gratitude of like, oh my gosh, look at how amazing my life is. I'm not homeless and, I'm able to do all these things, et cetera. But for you, it turned into an entitlement. So unpack that a little bit for me.
Yeah. At the root of it, it's insecurity, right? At the root of it, it was, I was doing stuff when I was playing basketball that I thought a professional basketball player should do, right? It's like, okay, this is the way, this is the lifestyle. This is what you do.
Can you give us an example?
Just being inauthentic to who I was. I would date multiple women. I would, and it just didn't feel good. It wasn't who I was at my core, but I wasn't strong enough to be like, nah, it's just not, I don't care what the world says you should do, spend money, do elaborate stuff.
Yeah. So was it like, I mean, just my image, I don't know any basketball players. I mean, I know you, I know a few, but my image of it is, well, I want to be fancy. I want to show the bling. I want to show the women. I date a bunch of women. I have a bunch of shit, all that sort of stuff. Is that what you mean by that?
Yep. And that's what the world tells you, being a professional athlete is about. And I was just I wasn't strong enough in who I was. I didn't really know who I was, honestly, at that time period. I didn't know what I cared about, what I didn't, and I thought I did, but it was going, okay, let me project this. Let me do this. And it just became this kind of unwarranted confidence, I guess, which ended up just becoming, a false narrative of arrogance. And, once it took prison to really figure that out. Right. I mean, that stayed with me for a long time, even post my, my basketball career. And, that's why I said, like, prison was one of the best things that ever happened, because it gave me, stripped all that stuff out, and, you get to the core of really what you care about. I don't know if you're a Matrix fan, but
who is it?
Yeah, it's great, right?
Well, let's be specific. Which Matrix are we talking about?
The first one, right? The first one, yes, absolutely, right? So when Neo walks into the see the Oracle, and she's baking cookies or whatever, one of the really interesting things is, if you look at the sign that's above her doorway, it says Temet Nosce. And I don't know if you're familiar with that already or not, but it's Latin, and it means know thyself. Right. And really that's one of the most important things, I think, in this human experience that we go through, is to really understand, and not what the world tells you are, not what, your family tells you are, your friends or whatever. Like, who are you? What do you care about at your core? What matters, what doesn't, and that's one of the things I realized, it's kind of just bringing it back is, I like being in committed relationships. I like having close friends. I like having deep, authentic conversations. I like those things. And that wasn't what the world was saying a professional athlete was about. It's like, just be a dumb guy, go.
For sure. Yeah. So, Kawhi Leonard, you know who Kawhi Leonard is, obviously, right? Like, amazing basketball player.
Yep.
I remember I read a story about him once, and then I saw him be interviewed years ago when he was with the Spurs and they were winning championships and everything else. And he was driving around like a 25-year-old truck or something. Like, that was his main car.
Yep.
And he started getting this. I mean, everybody knew him as just the guy that just didn't give a shit about all that stuff.
Yep.
And, I saw him get interviewed once. And he basically said, I love what you're saying, because he basically said, it's just not me.
Yep.
Like, this, I'm fine with this. Like, I don't need anything else. Yep. Like, I don't, I saw recently, not that long ago, Jimmy Carter, our former president, died. And I saw a news story that he was living in the same house for the last 40 years that was worth $177,000.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like, he clearly was another man who just didn't care about it. Now, I think there's other things that could, before we make all these guys heroes, right? Like, there's other mental stuff that could be going on that actually could be negative in their life as well. Like, maybe they just don't feel confident making any sort of money or having any sort of money or blessing themselves or others at all. So they just hoard it all. And there can be a lot of negatives about that too. And that could be also how they grew up, right? I've seen a lot of people that grew up poor that feel that way, that have this, they have more of they're not worried about failure as much as they're worried about success. And then when that success comes, they can't even enjoy it. Yeah. Like, I knew a guy years ago, he was a mentor of mine because he had a lot of really great things to say, but he had retired as an upper level Verizon executive. He had made, he wasn't even making that great of money, but the guy was just the most conservative guy you've ever met. He literally told me one day, he said, here's one key. Never go out to lunch. He said, in my 40-year career, I've never gone out to lunch. He made himself a lunch every single day. Now, just think about that in terms of how much money you're saving by doing that. So it's no surprise that when I met him, he was worth $10 million, even though he had only made, maybe $100,000 a year or something. He wasn't that high up because he just was, that was important to him. However, at first I thought that's amazing. And then once I actually dug into it a little bit, I was like, yeah, but he has such a miserly Scrooge attitude about it that he's just sitting on this money. It's not benefiting anybody, not even him and his wife, let alone his family, his friends, charities, like nobody. It's just going to go away. Like the government's just going to take it. It's just going to disappear. And then it's not going to bless anybody's life. So there is the other side of that. But I guess what I'm curious about is, was there something, do you remember a moment when it switched for you? Was there a moment when it switched from, I deserve all this, I have all this, I need to act like all these people are acting, to when you realize like, no, I need to be more authentic to myself. I need to be true to like what matters to me. Was there, what did that for you?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, that moment happened in prison, and
how far in, do you remember?
Yeah, it was about 2 years in, actually. I had fought the
what was
system.
the, sorry, real quick, just was the first 2 years just kind of like fighting it, being the victim still, or what?
Blaming everybody else. It's everybody else's fault. They did this, they did that, and it was a certain. I was reading a book called Outwitting the Devil at the time, and by Napoleon Hill, who wrote Think and Grow Rich, and wrote this other book, lesser well known but really impactful and powerful book. And it had a quote in there that said, Every tragedy carries with it the seed of an equivalent benefit. And
that was so good. Say that one more time.
Yeah, every tragedy carries with it the seed of an equivalent benefit. So I go, all right, I lost everything. I was engaged to my daughter's mom, prior to going to prison. That got called off. Like, like I said, family impacts, financial impacts, just going through a dehumanizing process of incarceration. And, I'd never been in trouble before, so I wasn't sure what that would look like. And, turning yourself from a name into a number and all these things. Right. And I go, this is a pretty big tragedy, but I wasn't convinced that quote was actually true at the time, but that was the turning point to go, well, if it's true, what could be potential benefits from this, and when I started rephrasing that and just kind of reframing the way I was looking at things, that was the beginning of, going, okay, there's actually some good stuff here, right? There's, I've been able to, read, study, know who I am, understand more about myself, et cetera, et cetera. That led to, really, oh shit, like this is all my fault. It didn't happen right away. but
yeah, for sure. Okay. So it was Outwitting the Devil, Napoleon Hill, right? Yep. Okay, for everybody that's watching or listening, I'm going to put that in the resources in the show notes. I haven't read it myself, so I'm going to go read that as well. Sounds like a great book.
Yeah.
Man, it's so true. And, a lot of what we're talking about today, which is what you started off with the mentality, the entitlement, et cetera, living as a victim in victim mentality. So let's back up. There are victims.
Yep.
Right? I think everybody listening to this has experienced being a victim in some capacity, some worse than others. There's a lot of people that have had way worse experiences than I have as far as being a victim. You've been a victim, like everybody's had some sort of experience with it.
No.
So it's not to negate the fact that we've been victims. It's what does that do to our mentality and our mindset? So if somebody cheats me or screws me over or something else, am I going to think of the world as everybody's a cheater and everybody's out to screw me?
Yep.
Or am I going to think of the world as being more curious about like, well, why did he do that? That's interesting. That's fascinating. And why is it affecting me in this way? And what is it about me? You said this earlier. What is it about me that's insecure or fearful about the way that guy's responding to me? Mm-hmm. Because I'm sure you relate to this as well. I found in my life, the older I get and the more secure I am and authentic with just who I am, the less that stuff bothers me.
You're free.
You're free of it, right? It doesn't matter what anybody else says or anything else. Like Even, I watch a lot of videos on YouTube and how to build presence and everything else as I'm building this media company and, the podcast being a part of it. And I like seeing ideas from people that know a lot more than I do about it. And I was watching this one the other day, and it was like the top 40 things I wish I would have known when I started my channel, sort of thing. And in the top 5 was how did he word it? He basically said, just don't interact with haters. He's like, you're just going to have people, there are going to be people that will dislike this episode, guaranteed. Yep. There will be somebody that will leave some stupid comment on here. And then I have a choice of, well, what do I care about that? Or do I care about that? Yep. And is this somebody who's actually loving and trying to be helpful and constructive and everything else? Or is it just somebody that's trying to hate, right?
Yep, absolutely.
So what do you think? It's really fascinating, man, that it took you, it's not fascinating that it took you 2 years to get there, because some people it takes their entire life and they never get there. So I don't think that's a long time. I just think it's really fascinating that there was something that shifted. Was there anything you could point to after that 2 years that shifted, or was it just kind of a slow progress thing?
Yeah, everything shifted. I mean, that it was literally a paradigm shift, and then things started showing up that I could go, wow, that's actually really cool. That's actually great. That's actually interesting. The biggest thing I didn't know at the time, because I was still working through it, but the biggest thing is I got to know myself, right? Like, and what I care about, what I don't. And I like nice stuff. I like, I'm not saying, I have tons of respect for Kawhi and just his ability to, be who he is, in the face of the world saying, be something different, right? I mean, whether it's in the NBA, whether that's at your job, whether it's with your family, like whatever the case may be, like people standing for who they are, in an authentic way, like I'm all for. Right?
It's like the same amount of respect I have for somebody who is a very well-known, very attractive movie star that somehow stays married to the same person for 40 years.
Yep.
I'm just like, I don't know how you do that. Like, that's amazing.
Yep. In the face of all this.
I would love to think that I would do that. But honestly, man, I'm not giving myself that much credit. I don't think I would. Like if women were just throwing themselves at me all the time, like how do you stay that consistent? And I mean, I think it's amazing. Like that's what I want to be like. I think that's amazing, Yep,
absolutely. And I think it comes from, that knowing yourself, right? Like, really going, all right, what do I care about? What are my values? Prioritizing those, and, a lot of times you don't know what that is until your back's up against the wall and you have to make decisions, right? And so I think a lot of times people are looking for comfort, looking for, ways out. And I was definitely, comfortable. And, like I said, I came from a space of, anger, really. Of just going, oh, the system is this way. And, we've been told one way and all that. And, it was the beginning of the financial crisis. So I saw, things happening. We had a lot of first time home buyers. They were losing their houses. I'm going, what is going on here? Right. And so, it took me down a path that, I just kept kind of peeling back the layers and it was just getting more upset, at the time. And, and then I'm like, screw that. That shouldn't be the way it is. And, had all these stories connected to it. So, and just walking through that. But, once I got to have the framework that I was working through, it didn't mean things got easier. I mean? It wasn't like, oh, everything's now rosy. And in fact, after I started looking at things differently, I still didn't really fully learn my lesson. Ended up getting myself put into solitary confinement for 4 months.
4 months?
So I was in the shoe for 4 months. Yep. And that was another opportunity to just go, okay, it's just me and you, big fella. Like, it's the conversation every day. You're just sitting there with yourself and
I know this is probably impossible to do, but can you kind of try to just walk us into how that feels? I just can't even imagine. Like I can barely imagine being by myself for a few days. Like I can't even imagine.
Yeah. It's a 6x9 cell, in special housing unit of federal prison that, there's other people, down the tier, but it's just you get fed 3 times a day. Maybe you get out, to a isolated area to get outside for an hour every other day. You get one phone call a week, where they bring the phone to you, and other than that, you're just there, right? My thing was, it was hard. It's like getting, there's no freedoms inside prison, but even the freedoms, quote unquote, that you do have get stripped away in solitary confinement, right?
Is that the hardest thing you've ever done?
Yeah, for sure.
I just pictured movies and all these other things and people going crazy in that environment and that sort of, like, how did you deal with that mentality?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you try and distract yourself. For me, I'm Christian. I believe in higher power. Like, it was an opportunity to come to literally a come to Jesus moment. We had our battles. It was not a pretty process. It was, screw you, I'm not, this is, I can't believe this. And, and, I'm a good person, blah, 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 all these other stories. Right. And, ultimately it was the best thing, like I said, for me, because that was when I was just like, all right, enough. Like, you go through a process. Right. And I think that was when I wasn't trying to distract myself from the pain of being there, and I allowed myself to go through that process. That was the blessing of it. Right. And it was like, okay, let's see what's actually here. Let's just deal with reality and what's going on. And, it ended up working out fine. There's people that spend, years and decades in solitary confinement. Right. And, there's a guy named Shaka Sangor who's a great guy but I think he did 17 years in solitary confinement. He's been out now for a bunch of years and has done some amazing stuff with his life. But it's just like the resilience, the diligence that it takes. Like he knows himself, for sure. And I think he credits a lot of that time to doing that. And it's not doesn't mean it's easy. Doesn't mean it's fun. I knock on wood, I never want to do that again, but it was, like I said, one of the best things that could happen.
Well, it sounds like it was really pinnacle in your development of moving past, being the victim. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
It's, oh man, I'm going to remember that story the next time I'm feeling like I'm all alone because you actually were all alone. And for everybody listening and watching, maybe you can relate to this because I certainly can, where I could use a bunch of things, right? Like when I went through my divorce, I felt all alone. When I've built businesses in the past, I felt all alone. When I've been, raising my kids when they're at my house, I'm not a single dad, but I'm a single dad when they're at my house, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I feel all alone, right? Like there's a lot of different areas where I'm like, I don't know who to turn to. I feel like I'm doing this myself. And for any business owner watching or listening to this, and I know you relate to that because you're a business owner, man, there's times as a business owner, you just feel all alone, right? Like why is everybody else doing everything else and I'm having to be the one guy that's doing this thing, right? Even, I'll give you an example that even happened the other day. I had this, we were trying this mastermind call. For those that don't know what that is, just type it in AI. It'll explain it to you. But we're trying to set up this mastermind call and we had done like kind of several weeks and it just ended up being me and this one other person and everybody else, like there was some reason they weren't coming or whatever else. Like, and they're all business owners. They're all entrepreneurs and they all know how to do these things by themselves and they still weren't committing to it. So like even among business owners, I sometimes feel by myself. I'm like, look, aren't there any other business owners that are doing the same stuff we're doing? And that's one of the reasons we met is because we're in a group of people that actually do stuff and are trying to, get to the next level in their development. But all that being said, the reason I'm saying all of that is that also could be such a place for me to play the victim and to feel like, oh man, I'm the one doing it all by myself. It's only me, blah, 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 blah. When in reality, you were actually by yourself. And then your point, I thought was a really good one, Seth, because you were saying, I don't remember the gentleman's name, but you were saying the guy that was in solitary confinement for 17 years.
Yep, Shaka.
That's another great example of there's always somebody better and always somebody worse. Like there's always somebody that has it easier. There's always somebody that has it harder.
Yep.
So maybe, as you're sitting in there for solitary confinement for 4 months, you're like, well, it could be 17 years. I mean, that's dramatically different.
Yep.
And then that guy somehow gets out and makes something of his life.
Yep.
Like, how many guys had a similar experience, or maybe even less of an experience? Maybe they went into solitary confinement for a day and they come out and they kill themselves.
Yep.
Right? Like, because of the mindset of what that does.
Yep.
Whereas, man, I mean, what a blessing it can be, because now, like, as a business owner, what is difficult for you compared to 4 months of solitary confinement?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't change the level of difficulty of the things to go through. It just gives a different perspective, right?
Correct.
And you get to come back and
100%.
you get to make a different choice, right? You know, things can be worse. You know, in that space, you mentioned it before, right? Gratitude is a big deal, right? And it's hard to be grateful if you're like, well, everybody else has this and I don't, right? It's like, well, you know, I don't like to say, you know, always think of the negative and understand where your perspective is. But that's, you know, ultimately gratitude is just being content in where you are. It doesn't mean being content in where you're going. It just means right now, everything is perfect in this moment right now. Right. And, you know, that's presence and all these things that are, you know, very, you know, Eastern, you know, philosophy type of things, but, you know, have a lot of truth. And I think every scripture, no matter what you're reading, has that element to it, right? It's like, you know, in the Bible, which is what I subscribe to, is, you know, the Bible says, do not fear, you know, 365 times in the Bible, right? It's like one for every day. Do not fear, you know, it's like, it's okay. You know, you're going to go through stuff. You're going to go through things. And, you know, those are opportunities, right? And it takes sometimes just hearing it, right? Hopefully people can, you know, listen to this and hear and go, oh, cool, that's a good point. What are my opportunities right now to really kind of, you know, exercise this muscle, you know, and, you know, if not, you know, God has a sense of humor too, and he'll put us through certain things to allow us to practice those, you know, those opportunities. Right. So.
Yeah. You know, it's, I used to have a business coach that I worked with for years in the financial industry. Mm-hmm. Guy's a total stud, probably has the best run financial planning practice in the US. Mm-hmm. He's based out of New York. And, you know, I would often be freaking out about something and call him and say, I don't know what to do here.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to like get passion for what I'm doing here, that sort of thing. And his answer was almost always the same. And it's a Buddhist saying, and it's chop wood, carry water.
Yeah.
And the idea behind it is just not only be present in what you're doing, just be fully available, like be fully available chopping wood. Like don't be chopping wood while you're watching something, while you're talking to somebody. It just means just chop the wood and just focus on chopping the wood, right? And carrying the water. And
right.
What it also means is just do stuff, right? Like just do what you need to do. And emotions and everything else are going to work themselves out as you do it.
And do the fundamentals, right? Like you're going to need water, you're going to need wood, like do those things, get those things moving, focus on those things, and all the other stuff gets put into place for sure. I do a multifamily accelerator where I help people that want to either go from residential to multifamily or want to just get into the real estate space. And so we do weekly coaching calls there. And, you know, it's always the premise of the whole thing is really helping get individuals out of their own head trash and just go, what is the best next step? You don't need to know the next step after that, just the very next step. What is that? And keep doing that. Take that step, you know, and get clarity on that, what that next step is, and just do that. Great. That's done. Great. What's the next step? Right. But just, you know, a lot of times we look too far into the future and we just don't know, you know, and that's where anxiety comes. That's where depression comes. And, you know, you create stories around, you know, what could be. And, you know, it's like, all right, like what's present here right now, like you said, and let's deal with that, right? It's great.
What one of my favorite, I don't know, modern day philosophers, I don't know what to call him, is Eckhart Tolle, if you've heard of him at all. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I just finished up a book this morning actually from him, and this is a quote that I just read this morning that I'll read. It says, "Performing an action in the state of acceptance means you are at peace while you do it. That peace is a subtle energy vibration, which then flows into what you do," which I think is fascinating. So it's basically saying, if you are in full acceptance of whatever action it is that you're doing, there's no choice but to be in peace while
Mm.
doing that.
Mhm.
You know, he talks a lot about just being as humanly present as possible with everything you're doing. I saw him a while ago, a video on Instagram where he was talking about being present, standing up from his chair, noticing how he was feeling as
Mm.
he was standing up, walking across the room to get a glass of water, and just
Mm.
every single moment of how present he was. And I'm like, man, I
Oh,
can't do that
absolutely.
without being on my phone, talking to somebody, like dancing around, thinking
Yeah.
about 8 million things about work, right? Like the idea in today's distracted world of just being fully present, like even right now, Seth, honestly, like
Yeah.
I'm trying to be as present with you as possible,
Yeah.
but I have a camera there. I have a camera there. I have a screen there. I have lights here. I have a light there. Like there's so many distractions even in the room that I'm in right now, trying to
Yeah.
just stay present with you. And that's just
Yeah.
the world we live in.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
have you found anything for yourself after going through all this stuff to where now, you know, you're feeling more grateful? How do you stay present these days?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the short answer is choice,
Hmm.
right? That's one of the beautiful things, free will, et cetera, right? That we've been given. We have the choice to choose how we want to think about things, how we want to look at things, how we want to perceive them, how we want to feel, right? Like, when I was playing basketball, I had the choice to go, I'm going to be fully authentic. And I chose to not be. I chose to, for whatever reason, it was a choice. But until I realized that was the choice that I was making, either consciously or just by default, right, that it was still a choice, and I think once we get clarity on going, okay, great, especially like I said, when our back's against the wall on things, we go, okay, we have a choice. We still have multiple choices. I think in every situation, there's at least 3 choices, right, that you can make. And the power to be able to choose in that space is the thing to be grateful for, right? Like, and that goes great. I'm going to choose to do this, and, we'll walk down that path. And, that brings that presence back that you're talking about. It brings the power back to us, right? It's going, okay, I'm not a victim of situations. Like, okay, I may not enjoy the situation, I may not like it, but I can choose to, make the most of it. I can choose to, go a different route. I can choose to make a different decision than what I've been making in the past, and that can happen at any moment, right? Which is pretty amazing when you kind of think about it, right? So yeah, I think
It's so true, man. And I don't know, just, this podcast plays in multiple countries, but just to all the United Statesians right now, I hate saying Americans because it's such an egotistical term if you live in the United States. By the way, if you live in the United States and you travel and you call yourself American, it's egotistical. Just think about it for a second, because you're not the only America. But anyway, that being said, to all the people that live in the United States, just a word real quick. Like, we are so incredibly blessed in this country. It's amazing. And I know that there's bad stuff that happens. People get murdered. There's fires. There's, shit that goes on all the time. I get that. But, I had the experience the other day where I have team members kind of all over the world. You got to love this world that we live in, right? That help with editing and help with social media and help with, writing stuff and copy and everything else, right? Like, it's not the world where, I have to have a few people in my office. Now I have people all over the world that help me with stuff, which is awesome. And I was having a call with one of them the other day who is amazing at what he does. Obviously, otherwise he wouldn't be a team member. I'm really stoked for everything that he's doing. He's putting together a team. He's in the process of building his company while he's still continuing to do what I need him to do. And we're having this entire conversation, and man, I wish I had a screenshot of it. He's in his room, his office, whatever you want to call it. And it's basically just like a square box. There's no lighting. There's no fancy stuff. Like, not even the stuff that I have here, which is like this room is like an afterthought in my house, right?
Mm-hmm.
None of that, but all over the wall, motivational stuff, things that he wrote down, things that his goals, what he's trying to accomplish, his vision. Like, honestly, having that call with him made me even more sold on him than I've ever been sold on him in the past, because he's just going to do it. But he's in this room of this little teeny building with all this stuff without a view. Like there's, and I sit here and complain like, I wish I had a better office and I wish I had a better view and I wish I had better furniture. Like, come on, man. This guy's making it happen in a box. Like he's basically in solitary confinement with just some writings on the wall, figuring out how to get his stuff done. Like how amazing is that?
He won't be there for long.
No, absolutely not.
You just know that's the framework to work from, and he'll chop wood, carry water, right, until it's something else, and then he'll take the next level up, and then the next level up, and at each level he'll get confronted with challenges, and that's life, right?
And the thing that really hit me too while I was having this conversation with him is I was like, look, the next time I had this conversation with myself, I said, look, Josh, the next time you're going to complain about something that he did wrong or something that he missed or anything else, remember this conversation and remember where he's at. Remember that you have an opportunity to actually help him build this stuff. And he's doing a great job. So before you start getting all bitchy and whiny, like thinking, oh, maybe grass is greener, somebody else is going to do it better. Why don't you stick with the guy that's motivated, that's committed, that's going to do it, and is going to do it even when he doesn't have a whole lot of resources or anything else? Like, how amazing is that?
Yep.
And then that changes my mindset too, right? Because I could constantly go out there and just be like, this team member sucks. They missed this one thing. They forgot to cross a T, and then just fire everybody, every 3 seconds. But then that doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help me. I get frustrated with that. And then I start having a victim mentality of, why does everybody suck? Why does no one know how to be a good employee or a good contractor, a good, blah, blah, blah. Or I could try to lift those people up and we lift each other up together. And then all of a sudden the whole mindset shifts, right? Now it's just like, wow, this is amazing. Look, we're doing amazing stuff together. Let's get it done. And it doesn't mean that standards go down, because my standards never, like, I'm a high standards kind of guy. It doesn't mean standards go down. It just means that let's build each other up together. The rising tide, right? The rising tide raises all boats.
And that mental shift changes the future. Right. It's that type of thing that just goes, okay, it's going to be a different future in that space than it would have been had you made the other choice. Right.
Again, speaking to the men specifically in the United States right now, we also have an opportunity right now with everything that's happening in politics and the world, et cetera. We have an opportunity to actually be able to work together instead of just bitching and whining and complaining. Like, I was talking to somebody the other day and they were talking about how they're just going to leave the country now because the country's in such bad shape. I was like, or you could stay and do something about it. I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah.
Like, what are we just going to flee every single problem that we ever have? Or are we going to face the problem, have courage, stand up to it, and then do something about it?
Yep.
And I mean, don't get me wrong, man. I don't do that often. So I'm not the one that's here saying, oh, look at me, I'm always doing that. I'm not. I'm trying to speak to myself as much as I'm trying to speak to everybody else right now.
Sure. No, me too, for sure. And that's the beauty of it, right? Is understanding the values, understanding what you care about, understand if that's a paramount thing for you and you're not making the choice to be involved in it, right? Do you want to? Can you? And you can change that right now, right? You can say, great, that is a big thing for me. I care to stand for this. And, one of the, just talking politics for a second, one of the great things about our country is I don't really, I care what people believe. I care where our country goes. I care about the impact and things like that. But the thing that I stand for most is for people to be able to decide whatever it is that they want to decide. I stand for their ability to have that freedom to decide, to make decisions for themselves, right? And I stand 100% unequivocally for that, like, period. I don't even need to agree with the thing that they're deciding to do. Just the freedom that they have to do that is the thing that makes, this country amazing. So it's, I don't agree with a lot of the things that are happening right now, but for the ability for people to just make that choice, like, a lot of countries don't have that still to this day in 2025, you don't have that. Right. So,
absolutely.
It's pretty wild. One of the things I'll share a story with you. I had a conversation with a guy, great guy, about a month ago. He is one of the first people to be able to have full internet access inside a prison, a state prison system. He has Zoom, we were having a Teams meeting, just communicating, and he's got a life sentence. At this point, he's not getting out. He's working on his master's degree. He's got a job with a tech company. He's got a consulting job that he does, all
Wow.
from inside prison. And he had a background on his screen, and it was the first conversation that I had with somebody that was just had free reign to be able to connect to the internet. I go, there's not you have access to 80% of the things that I have access to now with the internet there and all that, and you had a background screen and all that. But I was like, and if I didn't know that you were sitting in a cell right now having this conversation that you don't have the keys to, I wouldn't be able to tell. You could be in New York, you could be in wherever, and just at your apartment, type of thing. So and he's making a choice in that space of at this point never getting released, but to do things, chop wood, carry water, make an impact in the in the incarceration and formerly incarcerated space. The companies that he's working for, to build technology in there, be a good example for other people, and learn and grow and continue to move. And that's it was super admirable.
I think it's pretty amazing, because even even as you started telling the story, I'll be honest and vulnerable here for a second. Even as you started telling the story, my initial thought was, why? What's the point? Which is amazing, right? Like that's a limiting mindset alone.
Yeah.
Because I think that a lot of people, and I might fall into this too if I was there, is like, look, I got a life sentence. Like, what am I going to do from the inside?
Yeah.
But this man can impact other people from the inside instead of just letting his life just decay away over the years. I think that's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it also just shows you, man, like you don't need much to make an impact. You really don't.
Yep. Yep.
Like I have a mentor, and one of the things that he says often to me, he's in the arts, and if he's going to do a play or make a movie, etc., what he often tells me is, he says, my goal with every project that I have is just to influence one person. I was like, wow, that's an easy goal to hit.
Yeah.
Right. What if all of us, when we went on social media the next time, here, a test for everybody, including you, Seth, do this as well. The next time you go on social media and you record anything, why not just record it to have the impact of one person? Your goal just being one person saw this and was impacted by it.
Yeah.
I mean, that changes an entire mindset. I mean, everything is all about followers and about likes and about being the next popular person. And they even have accounts making fun of influencers. It's such a thing, right? But what if the whole idea was, well, how could I just impact one person today?
It's powerful.
It'd be a great way to live, wouldn't it?
It's powerful for sure.
I can't say that I go through every day of my life like that, but I wish I did, man. That is a goal for me.
Yep.
How do I impact one person positively today? That's it.
Yep.
That adds up.
Absolutely. That's that chop wood, carry water. I mean, it's like do that every day.
Man, this has been such a good conversation, Seth. Is there anything that you want to, I know we didn't really talk much about your business or anything else. Is there, if somebody was really impacted by your story, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Yeah. So follow, Instagram is really the easiest way. I'm at Seth Sundberg, SethSundberg. And you can direct message me and we can have a chat there for sure. I still work in the criminal justice space. My lifelong driver is to make an impact in the way that reentry is done for people that have gone through the criminal justice system, create opportunities for them as they get out, so that if they are making the choice to change their life, then, that process is better for them. Right. And some people, get out and they've made the choice to not change. Right. So, that process will play itself out too. But
so people that are getting out or recently got out, that sort of thing, would those be good people to contact you?
Yeah, definitely. For sure. And a lot of, we work in a lot of different, with a lot of different opportunities, getting jobs, getting really financially stable, right. That solves a lot of the challenges. some of those folks want to get into real estate, again, we have the multifamily accelerator, and what I do with them, and anybody that's listening, if they're interested, you can DM me and just say underwriting, and that's kind of the foundational piece of learning more about, especially the apartment acquisition side, which I think is the right space to be, being in the residential and in the multifamily space. Really understanding how underwriting goes. We have a free 30-minute, training and spreadsheet, template that they can use and start, going down that path, and happy to share that with any of your audience too.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. All right. So we'll add that in the show notes.
Cool.
Your Instagram account, plus sending the word underwriting if they're interested in the multifamily. And then also, obviously, if somebody is getting out of prison, almost recently got out of prison, knows somebody that's in prison, whatever that is there, maybe this is a dumb question, Seth, but is there a too late? Like, what if a guy got out 2 years ago and is just not quite getting on his feet, et cetera? Is that still a good person to send your way?
I've been out for 10 years and I'm still learning about things that are
Fair
popping
enough.
up, right? And there's a ton of resources. One of the things is there's no pathway, right? There's no clear path going, okay, hey, do the, you're going to need these 20 things in phase 1. You're going to need these 20 things in phase 2. It's just not clear. And that's one of the things that we're working on to kind of go, all right, nobody's going to do it the same, but there are fundamental things at each phase of reentry that are necessary, right? And you level up.
I love that.
Face new challenges, but there's a community. I mean, there's 70 million Americans with a criminal record.
Wow.
Right. So it's 1 in 3 people has had some sort of involvement with the criminal justice system. Yeah. But when you get out, you feel like you're all alone. Right. And it's it's just not the way, again, that I think it should be. So we're working.
Oh, for sure, man. I thank you for the work that you do. That's valuable stuff, because I mean, just practically, right? Like practically, if there weren't people like you doing the work that they're doing, then a lot of people get out and make a bunch of mistakes, and sometimes worse mistakes than when they're in there in the first place. And that just makes a worse society. So why wouldn't we want to help these people get back on their feet? We all make mistakes. We all fail at things. We all have limiting mindsets. We all have these victim mentalities that puts us in a bad spot. And honestly, all of us are 1 or 2 steps away from committing a crime. I mean, it's not that far away. So I appreciate the work you do, man. Thanks so much for being on here today, Seth. Appreciate you.
Man. It was great, Josh. Thank you.
All right, you guys. And as usual, please like, subscribe, send this. Most importantly, though, send this to somebody that you know. If something that we talked about today really resonated with you and you think, hey, there's a guy in my life that I think would like to hear that, send it to him. We'd love it. Pass it along. All right. Until next time, we'll see you later, you derelicts.